What's up everyone, Vu of nVu Films again, and I'm back with another idiotic video for you to watch. Today I'm going to talk about 5 idiotic clickbait Sony mirrorless camera hacks that everyone should know about. Firstly, it's a common misconception, or the Sony cameras overheat from time to time if it's used in 180-degree weather in the middle of the Iranian desert. But, you know, a lot of people know to use a simple menu adjustment known as auto temp standard or high. This, which is not the one I'm going to talk about today, which is this auto power off temp where I set to high. So meaning it raises the threshold of your Sony camera to not turn off until it gets a very high temp. But the debag hack that every Sony user should know is simply to open up this screen and then open up the battery door to help the camera dissipate heat. And to make the heat dissipation even better, you just hold your camera like this and blow on it like an Asian guy about to eat his hot noodles. That is hack number 1. Hack number 2 is even less obvious. We all know that Sony IBIS, IBIS stands for in-body image shakiness, because the IBIS is absolute trash. I don't think it's even 5 stops of stabilization, probably negative 5 stops of stabilization. That was an idiotic joke. That was probably not funny, but to alleviate the IBIS, or the very crappy IBIS, is simply to use a gimbal. Once you put the Sony cameras on a gimbal, it gets close to GH5 level of stabilization. The third hack, which this should be, you know, on the ultimate list of Sony camera hacks, is I see a lot of Sony users lust over that Canon color science and that soft skin tones. So the easiest way, you know, other than selling your camera, your Sony camera and buying a Canon, is to mimic Canon colors, Canon soft skin tones with your Sony bodies. So how do you do that? Firstly, you film yourself in 1080p. Then, once you finish filming, you go into your editing program. In my case, I use Premiere Pro, and you adjust the color temperature to slightly warmer, maybe a little bit extra magenta. And then you go to the effects and you go to blur. You want to search for blur. You want to search for Gaussian blur. Put that on your footage and set it to about 15, 20, 10% or so. And there you have Canon EOS R footage from your Sony camera. Nice, soft skin tones and warm color science that Canon provides. And there you have it. No need to switch system. If you want to mimic the 1DX Mark II look, just increase the Gaussian blur to 50%. Fourthly, some people might lust over that 10-bit 4K 60 Panasonic GH5 action. So how do you mimic that footage? Well, all you have to do is set your camera f-stop to like f8 or higher and film yourself that way. And I'd also recommend to bump your ISO to about 10,000, and then you get that high noise, everything in focus look that the Micro Four Thirds system offers out of your Sony camera. For example, there you have it. F10, ISO 10,000. This probably looks exactly the way a GH5 would look. No depth of field, noise with very little ISO. This probably mimics like 500 ISO from a GH5, 10,000 ISO on Alpha 6400. And here's an actual real mushroom tip for you. An actual Sony mirrorless mushroom tip for you. A lot of people ask me how my Sony footage is so sharp compared to theirs. And the fifth hack, which is I break the rules. I don't always shoot the 180 rule of filmmaking, which means that if you're shooting 24 frames per second, your shutter speed should be double that at 1/50. And if you're shooting 60 frames per second, it should be 1/20, or in our case, shooting DSLR mirrorless is probably like 1/125, etc., etc. However, when I'm shooting a wedding or something outside, sometimes the ND filter is not really convenient. So when I'm shooting at 60 frames per second, I know I'm going to probably use slow motion and I'm not going to leave regular motion. I tend to change the shutter speed, increase it to 1/200, 1/300, 400, 500, to make sure the exposure is correct at nice wide open apertures for that depth of field and outdoor situations. And what happens is the footage ends up looking sharper. Why is that? Because there's no motion blur. And usually if you're filming, if you play back footage at higher shutter speeds, at regular speed, the motion could look jarring because there's no motion blur. Whereas if you have, a perfect 1/50 or 1/125 and 60 frames per second footage and you play it back, there's nice smooth motion blur, as you see here right now, because I'm filming at 1/50, 24 frames per second. You get that nice motion blur and it's very pleasing, very cinematic looking. However, like I said, if you're shooting a higher shutter speed, it just looks very jarring. For example, this is 1/500. The movement is a lot more jarring than the movement of nice 180-degree rule shutter speed. Now, how does that affect the sharpness of your footage? Now, if you're filming movement, which a lot of us wedding filmmakers do, the bride and groom walking, having a good time, whatever, there's a lot of movement going on, outdoor reception, outdoor ceremony, and you want to do slow motion, the sun is kind of bright, you film with the faster shutter speed, and in turn, your footage should look a bit sharper than if you followed the rules. And because you did slow-mo, that lack of motion blur is not jarring because it's slowed down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to 1080p 60 frames per second, and I'm going to show you an example right here. This example might not be perfect, as I'm going to have to play with ISO a little bit to match speed, but this is currently filmed at 60 frames. This is currently filmed at 60 frames per second, 1/125 shutter speed. And as you can see, at the standard shutter speed, it should be a little bit blurrier because there's a lot of motion blur. And then once I switch over to a faster shutter speed, 1/800, 1/1000, there should be a little bit more sharpness to the details because there's less motion blur. So it gives you that quote unquote illusion that you're getting sharper footage. So if you're not satisfied with your 1080p 60 slow-mo footage, and the only reason why you should be shooting 1080 60 or 1080 120 is because you're trying to get slow-mo, then you should definitely play around with the shutter speed a bit to get slightly less motion blur to make your footage look a little bit sharper. Easy hack. Anyways, my bit, do you have any other additional hacks for me?
Hello, Mr. Vũ Mother at home. If I have a hack for you to sell all your track Sony gear for 3 for $10, like my brother sell t-shirt and DC3 for $10. You need to get the Canon for the night color shine and the night soft skin tone. It's very nice.
No one has time for that.
Maybe you won't look like some ugly track on YouTube
to do all that.
if you have the Canon color. The why you know hack the Sony to look like Fuji or Black Magic? It because Sony is no good. Like your YouTube channel no good. It is no good. Oh, I know one more hack. I know one more hack for your Sony camera. I know one more hack. You can open the battery door and throw the camera in the trash because you are a piece of ugly Vietnamese trash.
I'm probably going to have to wait for Black Friday to
you are big Vietnamese
get a new AI system. All right, that is enough of you for today, And I would suggest you go look for another job. Maybe apply for work with Make Art Now, Josh Yo. I heard he likes AI systems, not trash ones like yourself. Anyway, I hope that you liked that one useful hack, and I apologize for wasting your time on the other 4, and I tricked you into watching this. But if you like this content, please give it a like. It helps a lot. Comment, say whatever, share, subscribe, and until next time, lighten up.